our regular meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission. I'd like to start off by having the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As a reminder, the next regular meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission would be Wednesday, February 28th, 2018. And at this time, I'd like to have the members introduce themselves, starting on my far left.
Robert Flanagan, City Planner.
Christopher Schaub, Assistant City Planner.
Ray Rogozinski, City Engineer.
Dave White, alternate.
John Stores, Vice Chairman.
And on my far right,
Joseph Cloyd, alternate.
Jeff Hayden, alternate.
Terry Parker, Commissioner.
John Posey, Commissioner.
Andrew Howe, Commissioner.
Bill Veets, Chairman. And for the record, the voting members tonight will be Commissioner Howe, Commissioner Parker, Commissioner Posey, Commissioner Soares, and myself. Next item on the agenda.
Is new applications. Also the approval of last month's minutes.
Members had time to review them, and a motion will be in order to accept as presented.
Chairman, I make a motion that the Commission approve the minutes of December 27, 2017.
The motion is made in second. Any discussion? If none, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Next.
All right, now we're on to new applications. There are none. On to public hearings. One, to receive public comment regarding the draft of the Route 6 corridor plan.
Mr. Flanagan? Which one? Let's see it.
Mr. Chairman, if you want to have the secretary go to page 21 of the electronic packet and read the legal notice.
21. Okay.
All right, notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be held by the Bristol Planning Commission at City Hall, 111 North Main Street on Wednesday, July 31st, 2018 at 7 p.m. to receive public comment regarding the draft of the Route 6 corridors plan, with which the Commission proposes to adopt as an amendment to the City's 2015 Plan of Conservation and Development. Interested persons may attend and speak at this public hearing. Written communications will also be submitted prior thereto. Copies of the draft plan are available to public inspect at the office of the City Clerk and Land Use Office, Bristol City Hall, 111 North Main Street, at the Bristol Public Library and the Manrose Public Library. The draft plan can also be viewed and downloaded at the City of Bristol's website at ci.bristol.ct.us/619/Route 6 Corridor Study. William Veets, Chairman, Bristol Planning Commission.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Happy New Year to all the members of the Commission.
Same to you.
I think we can still say that. It's still January.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, members of the public, this evening I want to just give a brief primer for the Route 6 Corridor Study. As you know, we've been involved in this plan for 2 years now. When we first started talking about going forward with the plan, from RFP now to actual potential amendment to the Plan of Conservation and Development. So I've prepared a PowerPoint I'm going to go through relatively quickly. I'll stop at the end, and if any of the commissioners have questions, then, Mr. Chairman, I think then it would be appropriate to open it up to the public for questions and answers. So this has been a 2-year process, as I've referred to. The corridor is broken into 3 segments: the Terryville Avenue segment, the Downtown Gateway segment, and the Farmington Avenue segment. And for all of us here probably in the room, we're all very familiar with Route 6. Obviously, the Farmington Avenue corridor, or segment rather, is the most traveled. The downtown area leads obviously to our downtown, and then Terryville Avenue is a more rural segment in nature. So I thought for the benefit of those here tonight and for the members of the commission and those new members, I just walk through briefly the timeline. Little more than 2 years ago, we started this process. Mr. Weiner, had a RFQ. The commission approved. We put that out to the purchasing department for the corridor plan. We received 4 proposals in February. In March of 2016, Fitzgerald and Halliday was selected as the consultant, and I believe the vice chair sat on that committee that selected Fitzgerald and Halliday, along with the chairman of the zoning commission. In April of 2016, the commission received a draft scope of services from Fitzgerald and Halliday. In May of that year, the consultant presented the scope of goals of the study and the project timeline. In June of 2018 was the first public comment on the plan. We had a workshop on a Saturday morning at Tunxis at Bristol in June of 2016. I see some of the faces here this evening were there at that meeting. On June 22nd, just prior to Mr. Weiner's retirement, he provided an update to the commission. So Mr. Weiner retired on July 1st. I took over as acting city planner, and I again provided another update to the commission in July of 16. In August of 16, the vice chair, the chair, and I met with the consultant. In September, the consultant provided an update on the study, visions and statement guiding policy draft, and what we've heard so far, the results of the online survey, and that was in September of 2016. In October, I provided the commission with an additional update, and the consultant prepared recommendations and implementation steps. In November of that year, we received a document, the Bristol corridor, Route 6 corridor draft, and I asked the commission to review it at their December meeting. A special meeting was held to review and discuss the draft recommendations, and from the consultant, and public comment was welcomed at that meeting. We had another special meeting in January with more public comment to review the draft recommendations of the consultant. In April, we had another meeting with the consultant here at City Hall during the day. The chair, the vice chair, zoning secretary Provenzano, the city engineer was with us, and a representative of the Development Authority, along with our newly minted assistant city planner, was at that meeting in April with the consultant. The next night, we brought a draft of the corridor study to you in April of 17. May 31st, we had another special meeting, or you all had another special meeting, more public comment on the corridor plan, the final report. Carried over to September, we had, in the May meeting, you had accepted the report of the consultant. In September, we had the copies of the accepted plan distributed to the commission, and staff was directed at that point to begin the referral process for a possible amendment to the 2015 Plan of Conservation and Development. So, Mr. Chairman, again, members of the Commission, I want to just briefly walk through adhering to Section 8-23 of the Connecticut General Statutes, which governs plans of conservation and development in the state of Connecticut, and also the update process. So, as I said, 8-23 governs that, and you have directed staff to start that process for the corridor plan that's dated June 2017. So Section 8-23 says every 10 years the Commission shall prepare or amend and shall adopt a plan of conservation and development. Following adoption, the Commission shall regularly review and maintain such plan, and the Commission may adopt such geographical, functional, or other amendments as parts of the plan or parts of the plan in accordance with the provisions of this section. The Commission may at any time prepare, amend, and adopt plans for the redevelopment or improvement of districts or neighborhoods which in this judgment contain special problems or opportunities. That's where I think that this plan falls under. There was a special need for Route 6 to be studied. It's been a long need, and you've identified that as under Section 8-23. Also under 8-23, you're here this evening because you're required to have at least one public hearing. As I alluded to earlier, we've had at least 5 public sessions with a public comment, but now is the formal public hearing on possible adoption to amend the 2015 plan. Under 8-23, you all have to refer this to the City Council. They are the governing legislative body. On October 25th, the Commission directed staff to transmit paper copies of the corridor plan to the Bristol City Council, and staff did that on November 13th, and that was 79 days prior to this potential public hearing, so we've satisfied the 65-day requirement there. At least 35 days, the plan shall be posted on the website. The plan has been posted on the website since June 1st. As I alluded to there in the slide, it was posted on June 1st, but nonetheless it was posted on the 13th also, obviously. Then there's been 79 days between the 13th and the 31st to receive comments on the plan. At your November 2017 meeting, you set a public hearing date of this evening, and that was 63 days ago. Under 8-23, you also have to refer this to the Council of Governments, and the Regional Council shall submit an advisory report along with its comments to the Commission at or before the hearing. In at least 35 days, you need to submit a copy to the City Clerk. On that November 13th date, we referred the plan to NBCOG. We also referred the plan to the Capital Region Council of Governments in Hartford, and looked for a comment from them because of Farmington, the town of Farmington being affected, and they're in the Capital Region. And obviously the Bristol Town Clerk. We also made formal recommendations per statute to the Town Clerk of Farmington and the Town Clerk of Plymouth, and all of those copies were mailed, certified mail, and a hard copy was actually put in the mail and sent to them. Because you're having a public hearing, as you know, you have to put a notice in the newspaper, and that was done per the statute. There was 2 notices that appeared, and the notice has to make reference to where the draft plan is located. So those notices went in on January 17th and January 24th for tonight's meeting. In addition to the publishing of the newspaper notices, the Route 6 corridor plan, the plan was posted on the webpage along with the legal notice there, the Planning Commission webpage. The Town and City Clerk's bulletin board was posted with the agenda, and the mayor had her Facebook page updated to reflect the notice of the meeting along with Bristol Public Works and the Development Authority's Facebook page. Staff also made direct contact with the Plymouth Town Planner and the Farmington Town Planner. We actually called them on the phone and spoke with them. And by email, we also reached out informally to the Sullyton and Plainville Town Planners. The City Hall agencies, Development Authority, Water Department, Corporation Council, Assessors, Controllers, Town and City Clerk, and Parks and Recreations were all notified of this public hearing. And we made a notice also to the Zoning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, and Historic District. Part of my site plan committee, police, engineering, fire, and building and zoning were also notified. On the city website, we posted, obviously, the calendar of the meeting, and specifically, we called out that this public hearing was for Route 6 this evening. The Bristol Press posted this in their newspaper on Friday the 26th, letting the public know of the hearing. So the staff received comments from the Development Authority, the regional planning staff, Council of Governments, and we had informal comments from Plymouth, Farmington, Southington, and Plainville. I'll get to that in a moment. So, Chris, can you jump to the packet for this evening? Just want to go over the comments we received briefly. Clerk in Plymouth. Jump down, Chris. Town Clerk in Farmington. These were comments from the Development Authority you have in front of you. I'm not necessarily going to read those into the record, but I am entering those into the record. The Development Authority, and these were posted online with a hyperlink to the application this evening. The Development Authority had some just general comments. Chris, can you just bounce down a little, just the last comment here? One of the comments from the Development Authority was that they thought that the plan, which includes the downtown gateway segment, the design is great. This is Mr. Malley from the Development Authority. The design is great, and I believe it would provide a tasteful entryway and transition to the downtown. I will say that it may be more appropriate to take into consideration any feedback of the current owners of properties. So again, the Development Authority through Mr. Malley had some general comments. Next slide, please. The Development Authority also marked up a map where they believe, and we were in agreement, that there were some modifications that had to be made to the zoning map. There was some mislabeling, and we've already reached out to the consultant and made those corrections, and we'll include that in our list of items to you for possible changes to the plan. This was the referral to the plan, the informal referral to the planner in Plymouth. He acknowledged that he received the plan. The planner in Farmington, assistant planner, Ms. Rutherford, acknowledged that she received the plan and was passing it on to staff. And then we received comments from the town planner in Southington. His comment was impressive work. Mr. Phillips. And then Mr. DeVoe from Plainville said he agreed with the planner in Southington, and it's a clean document with clearly detailed recommendations. Can we go back now, Chris, to the PowerPoint? I'll be brief here, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to wrap this up. So again, as I stated earlier, the segment of the corridor is broken into 3 segments: Terryville, Downtown, and Farmington Avenue. There was a vision statement associated with the plan, and essentially says Route 6 in Bristol will continue to serve in its role in the community as a significant commercial corridor. It will be a destination, and most new development will result from infill and adaptive reuse or redevelopment of existing sites. And then there are 3 distinct segments, as we referred to: Terryville, Downtown, and Farmington. Here's some mapping of the segments, all done by Fitzgerald and Halliday, our consultant. Here's the Farmington Avenue segment. This is the downtown concept plan. This is aspirational in nature. You may recall that we get a lot of questions in the office about the corner here of Route 6 and North Main Street. That was the Mamazio building that was demolished several years ago. We actually also get regular phone calls from the property owner, and we always reach out to them and try to work with them. Since I've been here, I have not had a physical meeting here at City Hall. We've talked to the owner several times to try to identify some issues, some opportunities to redevelop that corner. But again, this is aspirational in nature. Just gives you an idea of what that corner could look like. And I thought it was a good rendition from the, a good rendering from the consultant. So some of the land use themes, we want to promote some mixed use. We want to manage character and design of Route 6. We want to provide some flexibility for the future. We also want to right-size parking. And there are some zoning adjustments that would be the primary tools of the plan. Access management. Access management is already in the zoning regulations, and it would just be relatively easy to implement access management on targeted areas on Farmington Avenue to try to limit some curb cuts and get essentially commercial neighbors to work together to try to create some common access. Connectivity between plazas, we've talked about that for the duration of the study. Safety is a major concern for all the folks that use Route 6, whether they be waiting for a bus or traveling with their car. And then obviously some targeted bicycle and pedestrian enhancements. We know that Route 6 is never going to be walkable, but we can try to at least make it safer for those who unfortunately find themselves out there or are trying to cross the streets at very busy times of the day. So there's 3 initiatives. Zoning would be amendments to the zoning regulations, amendments to the development processes, development collaboration, economic development, marketing, partnerships, and transportation, city actions in collaboration with DOT. So I want to just wrap up with the guiding policies. In order to achieve the vision for the Route 6 corridor, future infrastructure improvements and development will be guided by the following policies. 1, place priority on the reuse of previously developed sites and the location of new development in existing commercial areas that encourages the adaptive reuse of existing resources while respecting the remaining residential character of the corridor. Number 2, encourage design of commercial areas that are compact, mixed use, and walkable. Maintain the existing housing pattern. Number 3, in well-established neighborhoods that surround the corridor. And number 4, actively pursue a program of economic development that values the existing established businesses and helps sustain them. Also, number 5, promote new businesses in the existing commercial zones along Route 6 that complement rather than compete with those in downtown. Create a transportation model that conveniently links the commercial activities to one another, as well as connectivity with other corridor components. Implement access management to reduce the number of curb cuts along Route 6, with special emphasis being placed in the Farmington Avenue segment. And enhance the aesthetics of Route 6 with complementary site design, signage, and landscaping design to provide a positive day-to-day experience of the corridor for those who live there and travel there and spend time at its many destinations. These were the documents that we had read into the record earlier, all the referrals that were made for this public hearing. And I will leave next steps right now, and I want to just put back up for you. Chris, can you go to the front page and just have the 3 segments displayed? Mr. Chairman, I would be open to any questions that you or the Commission would have right now. I tried to keep that as succinct as possible, but there was a lot of information we had.
No, you did an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any comments, thoughts before we hear from the public?
And Mr. Chairman, by virtue of this presentation, we will enter this presentation also into the record this evening, the public hearing record.
Okay, thank you.
There are copies of the corridor plan in black and white if anyone would like to have a paper copy. We didn't print a bunch, but we printed a few, and they're available for public consumption if anyone would like.
Very good. Thank you. So, if anyone would like to comment, just step up to the microphone and just state your name and address for the record, and all the comments that will be made tonight will be taken, and we'll sort them out within the next 30 days and take it from there.
Good evening. My name is Craig Miner. I live at 88 Anderson Avenue. And I read the study back in the summer when it first came online. It's a very comprehensive study. It's a very readable study as these reports go. I was very impressed with how accessible the report was. I was also impressed at the time, although I don't remember the details, with how many specific action items the report contained that specifically gave responsibilities to different town agencies and departments. I thought that was good that you're making it clear that you have expectations that the rest of the city will step up and implement parts of the report. I thought that was, I especially appreciated that. And I definitely support annexing it to the plan of conservation development. Definitely be a good addition to the plan. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Larry Tallman, 415 Farmington Avenue. As somebody who's lived in the Farmington Avenue residential corridor for over almost 35 years, I'd like to make a couple comments. This plan is a wonderful thing on paper. It has some issues where you're going to change the zoning unconditionally in my area, some of them as a mixed use. That would be wrong. If you need to change zoning, we have a process that has worked since Bristol's been here, and I've been to a few of the meetings, and everybody goes away happy. Well, not everybody, but the point is it's legal, it's fair, it's the right thing to do. To put a blanket policy in place is wrong. Now, on a couple other issues, I live on a section that I consider to be the Bristol Motor Speedway. I will guarantee you that in the 34 years that I've been there, there hasn't been 10 speeding tickets written in front of my house. Anywhere in that corridor, the average speed is probably 60 to 70 miles an hour. From the light of Friendly's, they floor it to the top of the hill to the next light. Nobody enforces that. This plan of yours is wonderful, except for that issue. We're widening Route 6 down in front of Home Depot. That's just going to add to the issue. With all the vacant places that we have now, This is it's an aesthetic plan. It's not a solution to any of our problems. Our problems here in Bristol, I believe there's 4 active pawn shops. Why? Bristol is not that kind of town, or is it? When we have that kind of business and it flourishes, it tells us something is wrong with Bristol. It used to be a town where folks lived here and worked here. Now, if you don't work at a McDonald's or some other fast food joint, you're out of business. And speaking of fast food, let's have some more. Now, across the street from my house is a little place that's called, well, the last business was Yogurt City. Didn't survive. Before that, the owners tried to put in a few different burger joints. Didn't survive. The only thing that was successful there was a place called Just Produce. Now, Just Produce was more like an old-fashioned neighborhood market. People came from all around. You could even walk there and get a gallon of milk. But the rent, the people went crazy on the rent, drove them out. Right next door, this beautiful new building. It's supposed to be O'Reilly's Auto Parts. 3 years now, was it been vacant? All of these plans are wonderful. They don't fix the issues that we have now. They make it pretty, and they cost us a lot of money. So what I think we should do is, if we don't enforce the laws, I know the traffic study is absolutely separate from this study. But without it, this won't work. How fast do you drive by your pretty new buildings? How fast do you drive by the curb cuts that aren't there anymore? To me, it just sounds like, well, honestly, it's something you had to do, and you did it. So I'm going to thank you for all your efforts doing that. But let's fix the underlying issues before we waste any more time or effort. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Tim Furey, 43 Bellevue Avenue, Bristol, Connecticut. And I understand, and Bob and I have talked at length about the nature of the process, and this is a policy document. From there, as Mr. Minor said, there'd be a lot of other work to do, reviewing how to implement the policy. But that being said, I have reviewed the study several times at length, and I compliment Bob. He's going out of his way to keep several of us, attorneys August and I, informed on its status. He even gave me a free copy of it so I could share it with other people, different than online, which was a pretty nice deal. So my couple of comments are, when you're setting the policy decisions, if you adopt this, the couple of concepts I didn't like is, I understand that they're recommending some different levels of zoning be implemented. And along the corridor, there are people, citizens of this community, many of which are my clients, who over the past several decades, most of which during my career, have purchased properties along the corridor. Some of them in residential areas, some of them in the more intensive BG zones. And specifically in the area that probably runs from the Bristol Plaza up and through to about Burger King, there's a lot of those properties are zoned BG zone, and I have clients who have bought properties, have consolidated them, or own 3 or 4 properties with the idea that they're zoned BG and they might be able to do something with them someday, or they already have. And part of what this plan would do is change the zoning of that, bring it down a notch, take away some of the things that they could apply for now, some of the motor vehicle uses, the fast food uses, the drive-up uses, which could be a problem in the wrong spot, but they would no longer have the right to consider that under some of these implemented policies. And I don't like the idea of taking things away from our citizens, things that they've paid for and have relied on. So I think the better way to approach this is to leave the underlying zoning alone. It's worked for us. And then to work on some of the other things that are the incentives that give you better benefit of the land in the planning tools you have now. If someone wanted to take down or redevelop one of the properties in a stretch I just described, where there may be a couple houses today, they still have to get site plan approval. To do the more intensive things, they still have to get a special permit for a drive-up window. And there's been 2 or 3 instances I know of where someone tried to get a drive-up window for a facility, and the zoning commission said no, because it wasn't appropriate, or at the time, there wasn't the light everybody thought was going to go in, and they said, for right now, no. Now, with some of these Route 6 improvements are going to happen, or if the stoplight goes in across from Sheila Court, well, maybe at some point, that little Dunkin' Donuts there may get a drive-up, or it may become a bank with a different use. Maybe then they'll get it. At least they have the ability to ask. And the Zoning Commission, to date, has had the, and you don't approve special permits for the rookies on the dais, but they've had the self-discipline to do it. But why not have the tool in the toolbox to benefit our own citizens and businesses? So I do like the idea of some of the incentives. I do like the idea of implementing some of the access management criteria on new site plans that have to go, because that's just planning. The town staff's always looking for us to do that anyway, and then some of those other things they're encouraging benefit. And I do like some of the other potential benefits. In the section of Route 6 where this gentleman, I'm sorry I didn't get his name, lives, that's the area that's traditionally been, in your plans of development, the existing way of development is to try to preserve that residential character. And that does make some sense, because it does limit some of the traffic impacts that have been in that corridor. The O'Reilly spot was always a commercial place. The produce place was Kentucky Fried Chicken. And they've been judicious about what else was allowed to happen in there. But the key to understand there, in my opinion, is it is not the long-term residential character of that area is difficult. And there are some people in that area that have taken great pride in their homes, and they've maintained them as their homes. There are others that have not. And there are some businesses in there, smaller, owner-occupied homes in there. One of them is empty right now, but it was Arrow Manufacturing, or Arrow Window before that. I think it was a dentist. But some of those are very appropriate. And I think in that area, rather than changing the zoning, you should look at some overlay concepts to encourage the adaptive reuse, which is one of the things that's come up in all areas, to encourage the adaptive reuse of those areas, maybe for small business purposes, but to give more flexibility, recognizing that that's a tough area to have a single-family home and live. Those who want to would have the ability to, and maybe get some incentives to do some proper things there. And those who couldn't would have the ability to potentially sell their house to something that could fit in there appropriately, and you're going to have the maintenance without the pressures of the large-scale traffic. And in the far end of the community going towards Terryville, they didn't make a lot of intensive recommendations. A lot of that's the BN zones now. Personally, I think you could handle more traffic up there, but I understand we all want to maintain certain levels of character. As long as I get a good grinder up there, I'm happy. But again, we don't want to create the burdensome requirements of, minimum size, there's 10,000 square feet minimum size, window fenestrations and things. Route 6 is our tax engine. And people who develop properties, they tend to do the right things. We've got a lot of very positive things on Route 6, and I don't think we want to have architectural design reviews and standards that are that intense. Create incentives, do something else, or work with the BDA, but to build them in is an impediment in our zoning regs, I don't think is the answer. I didn't think necessarily the goal of this, I never thought the problem with Route 6 was its attractiveness as a commercial corridor. I didn't think that's what the goal of this was. I thought it was to do with, we all get around our town and up and down Route 6 appropriately. But not that those aren't all good ideas. We all want to make it more attractive. There's ways to encourage that, and I think you can look at some of the incentives you put in downtown development for greater density, or some parking waivers if you do some of these other things. So it's really a part of the next stage of this, if you will. But people are going to look at this report as if it's gospel. So I would just hope you would send it around with some comment. And my comment would be, we want to be cautious about taking away rights people have paid for, and creating incentives that run to human nature versus taking rights away from folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to comment? Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Sebastian Paniota. I live on Country
Excuse me,
Lane.
could you spell your last name for the secretary, please?
P-A-N-I-O-T-O.
And your address?
I'm sorry?
Your address?
Country Lane, which is off of Stafford, which is off of Route 6.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm also on the Inland Wetlands Commission. So I could appreciate what you have here in terms of the green space, the stormwater systems that I read, the aquifer protection in regards to the gas stations. There's a couple mentions of electric charging stations. I think that might be a good idea considering just a couple days ago, Harley-Davidson, they have an 18-month plan for an electric bike. We have Harley-Davidson down the road, not to mention any other auto firms that are going to push their electric cars. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think at least one of those might be a good idea in the near future. The average age in the report is 41 for the corridor commuter, so there's going to be more generations 15, 20 years down the road of working age people going up and down the street. So that's something to just keep in mind. The shared access parking is a good idea. If there could be some kind of interconnectedness of parking lots that can help some flow running parallel to Route 6, that would be helpful. I know the widening is going to hopefully do wonders for the street, but looking at other ways to just alleviate some pressure there. Otherwise, the reuse of the existing buildings, also a good idea. I don't know if we're anticipating more vacant buildings on the street. I do. Combining the signage and restricting a lot of what we see now with the signs, the banners, the flags. It's a lot of clutter. It would be a good idea. In that same vein, a beautification committee. I know we have like 25 committees. What's one more? That would be helpful toward the downtown area as well as the whole Route 6 area. I just want to note, like, one thing I did find is in the retail surplus and leakage findings, it describes an unmet demand for retail offerings, including merchandise stores. I would question that. I mean, I would be prudent about, I know with merchandise or in retail, I'm not sure long-term how much success we could have with. I mean, I can tell you now there's businesses on Route 6 that in 5-10 years might not be there. So I just would like to be prudent about what we put on the street in terms of retail. There was mention about big box continuing on the street. I just know we see left and right that there's a lot of places going out of business, so food for thought, I guess. Any surplus that we get in terms of that data is going to diminish in the future. I know it was brought up with the recategorization of the zoning. I mean, I would just, as far as the people that live in the residential areas, the long-term plan for them, and just keeping them in mind. I know they live on Route 6. They spend a lot of time there, so changing it to mixed use or what have you could have some effect. So, but overall, I think it's a good plan. It's organized, which is the great part of it. It's a total hodgepodge there. Like, if we're honest, it's a little trashy. I moved here 6 years ago. Where I work now, you'll get that word thrown around a lot. So I like that we're trying to change it. So hope we can move forward with a lot of what we see. Thank you.
Thank you.
James Iogas, 104 Bellevue Avenue, Bristol, Connecticut. I think it was just over 2 years ago that we came before this commission with a zone change application for Route 6. And in the midst of that discussion, it was determined that this report would probably serve everyone well to answer some of the questions that we had posed at that hearing 2 years ago. And I've read the report twice, and I think it has answered some of the questions. Probably not to my satisfaction, but this is just another thought on the subject. I saw the surplus charts, and it made me a little concerned about what would it take to keep Bristol people in Bristol to shop, or Bristol people in Bristol to go to dinner, or to go to a movie, or go to a theater, and I don't know if we can make that happen. You certainly would like to think that you could. I'm not so sure that we can, but I'd like to think that we could. If you want to do those things, I guess you have to ask yourself, where are we going to be able to do that? It would seem to me that Route 6 is probably one of the areas that could happen. Certainly downtown Bristol would be another. So in looking at this report, I kind of felt that the retention of the residential uses on the portion of Route 6 from Brook Street to Oakland Street, in my mind, doesn't make a lot of sense long term. Now, I certainly know that you offend people who are currently living there when you say to them, well, it's not really suitable. And they say, well, I lived here for 35 years, and I raised my family here, and it's perfectly fine. But when you look at those houses, and as you're going up Route 6, and you have Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then you have a little cape next to the Kentucky Fried Chicken, I'm not so sure that's the scenario in which you want to raise your family. And that house has fallen into disrepair. The house next to it's in disrepair, and the house after that is in disrepair. There's not a lot of incentive for the homeowners or the people that own these buildings to improve them, because the rents that you can generate on Route 6 are probably not the rents that you can generate in other parts of town, because of the traffic, because of the noise, because of everything that goes on there. So eventually, these have to morph into something else. We were successful on the other side of Oakland Street when we took down some of those residential homes on Route 6. And Thomaston Savings Bank came in and built a nice bank. We improved the area. I thought we made it look pretty nice. That's the type of improvement that I can foresee on Route 6 between Brook Street and Oakland Street. I think possibly this report misses that because the adaptive reuse of those buildings as homes doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. The other part of the report, and I think Bob mentioned it, was that some of it was mislabeled. I remember seeing Maple End as residential, and that's certainly not the case. The question about North Main Street came up, and I think Bob said that he hasn't had any requests or met with the owners there in some time. But I think my last look at that property, based upon our current regulations, required 9 variances for somebody to build something on that site. So given the nature of our regulations as it applies to that site, it'll never get built on. Perhaps that property comes out of the downtown business zone and becomes more of a general business zone fronting on North Street, so that you could apply general business zoning regulations as opposed to downtown business regulations. Then maybe you get a use, an adaptive reuse of that property. Otherwise, it will continue to sit there, and maybe a pocket park is what it ends up being, which doesn't help anybody. So I guess the long and the short of it is that I'm more inclined to recommend to this commission that more commercial activity on Route 6 is better than less, or standing still. The traffic is the traffic, and that promotes general business. It doesn't promote residential living. So that's my view on the subject.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening, Sean Rist, 53 Lancaster Road.
Good evening.
Good evening. Well, I'm glad the plan is going to address the safety concerns for pedestrians. I'm hoping to have some working crosswalks over near my end of town, which is over near the intersection of Stafford Avenue and Route 6. And they haven't been working for quite some time, unfortunately. I'm not sure what outreach the Commission did to members of the public in regard to their transportation concerns and their pedestrian and biking concerns. Was there any input regarding incorporating bicycle paths on Route 6. Did any of that information in this plan come from any of the residents that would be the end users of that? I would hope so. You know, it was interesting at the beginning, before any public comment was received, the Planning Commission found it important to let the public know that the public was informed that there was going to be a meeting and they had the opportunity to voice their opinion. But unfortunately, in the instance of the newspaper articles that were published, the public hearing notice posting on the mayor's Facebook page, none of these things actually tell the residents what this plan hopes to achieve in regards to changes in zoning and changes in density for development. And that's unfortunate. My other comment has to do with something that I already had made comments about, minimum and maximum parking requirements. Route 6 corridor has approximately 20,000 cars per day that travel on it. And I was thinking about this on the way here. You know, if I had the opportunity to change the amount of parking that any of these businesses on Route 6 had, which ones would I pick? Would I create parking maximum for any of these businesses on Route 6 between my house and here? And I couldn't come up with a single parking lot that I thought had too much parking. So I'm very bewildered why this planning principle would be applied to Route 6 corridor. I think it flies in the face of what's happening over here on Federal Hall, where there's not enough parking for some of the residents, and people are parking on sidewalks, which are being funded with taxpayer money, and it's in conflict with the charter that this is happening. And when you guys tried to put an overlay zone in last time, well, I shouldn't say you guys, when the city of Bristol last had the expansion of overlay zone up Main Street, there was an outpouring of residents. It's probably one of the biggest meetings that the zoning commission had seen. And one of the biggest complaints was the parking issue. So are we going to bring the same problems that we have over here on Main Street to this TMU zone? Is that going to accomplish our goals, whatever our goals are? I'm not sure that it will. And everybody knows pretty much how I feel about everything else. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Tim Gamache, 1389 Stafford Avenue. Just a couple of points. Early on in the presentation, there was a comment about how we would encourage prospective developers to consider downtown first and Route 6 second. I'm not quite sure how you're going to do that. And the idea of more commercial on Route 6, while it might be a good idea, I would also hope that there would be some consideration given to those prospective developers on Route 6 being they would enhance or at least be collaborative in nature with what we're trying to do downtown and not undermine what we're trying to do downtown. That's just the point I'm making, that, you know, they should be working together on that and making sure they're not undermining what we're trying to do across the street if we do indeed develop Route 6 the way you're intending to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Flanagan, any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, the assistant planner has been feverishly writing notes, as I have. We've taken all the comments down. I would suggest that we prepare a report for you. I've discussed this with you and the vice chair. In the next month, we'll sit down during the day and meet with him. If we have to meet 2 or 3 times, we'll go through the list, and then we'll bring a report back to this body in February for your review. But at this point, I have nothing else to add. But I think all of the comments have been very well articulated, and we've made note of them. And again, this document is advisory in nature, and it's not. These are not zoning changes. These are just plan of conservation and development amendments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any comments, questions? If none, motion would be in order to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion was made and seconded. Any discussion? Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for all your comments tonight.
Mr. Chairman, there's another motion in front of the Secretary also.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that that the Bristol Planning Commission postpone the final decision of the Route 6 corridor plan to the February 28, 2018 regular meeting of the Planning Commission.
Second.
A motion was made and seconded. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda
Is pending applications. We have none, so we move on to zoning commission referrals. Application number 2271, proposed amendments to the zoning regulations to replace business zones with business and industrial uses, and 2, to replace 30 with the number 30 with the wording 30 for layouts and dimensions of parking. Subsection 8-B.6.A. Timothy Furey and Charles Talmadge, applicants.
Do you have correspondence from any?
Yes, Attorney Furey. If you want to just go ahead and make your presentation, and then we can read that into the record. Thank you.
Attorney Timothy Furey, 43 Bellevue Avenue, Bristol, Connecticut, and I am the applicant, together with Charles Talmadge, who is here as well. Over the past several years, I've been working with Charlie and potential developers within the city of Bristol on concepts plans for redevelopment of property or use of vacant properties. And we, in reviewing some of those concept plans, looking at placement buildings, sitting with staff, came across this section of the zoning regulations that had a couple inconsistencies in that it talked about, in our minds, inconsistencies, because it talked about the zone rather than the use. And in part it talked about both. And as you're aware, because you've approved a lot of it, and it was in part discussed in the previous conversation, most of our zones now have cross uses with special permits, we have several overlay zones, several right around this whole area we're sitting in has overlay uses, cross uses, encourages them in fact, and in the downtown area has incentives for development by putting everything from bike racks to bike paths, etc. And in looking at this existing regulation, we thought it caused inconsistency, because when you do have a business use, you have a certain type of design, because the business uses have customers that aren't always the same, that just come to a site, have different types of vehicles that service them, make deliveries, etc., from residential uses where you tend to have the same customers over and over and over, and you don't have those more intensive sized trucks, etc., or maybe a trash truck once a week, like happens at my law office. So the amendment we proposed did one very simple thing. We had the word 10 and the number 30 in the regulation, so we just made them both words rather than word and a number. That was just to do, because Alan Weiner would have asked me to do it if I wrote it, so I fixed it, figuring he probably wrote it. But the other was to make consistent the term that if you had a business or industrial use, whether it be in a residential zone, an industrial zone, an overlay zone, if the use proposed, the structures proposed and the use of them in a new site plan was for a business or industrial use, the first parking space had at least be 30 feet back from the road. But if you had a residential use, you only had to be 10. And the reason for that is kind of similar to the point Mr. Roos made earlier, is that we're trying to encourage, especially in the downtown area, adaptive reuse of properties, newer housing opportunities, and part of what you're deciding is this consistent with your plan development. So we're trying to encourage the reuse of properties, newer housing opportunities, newer housing consistent, getting rid of some of our old housing stock, making downtown more attractive. But we have this restrictive parking requirement that requires the first space be 30 feet back, and that means a couple spaces at least, and it means units, because you're working within more limited areas, downtown and in other areas. So it seemed like a rational, minor change to our regulations, recognizing the distinction between business and industrial uses. It encourages the reuse of properties, encourages them in a positive way. I don't think there was any report negative back from the regional planning agencies.
Attorney Furey, there was only one report we've received so far, and obviously that goes back to the Planning Commission. The Council of Governments in Hartford had no negative comments. It was just thank you very much for the receipt.
Okay.
There's no regional issues associated with the amendment, but we haven't received all the other comments yet, and those will go to the zoning commission, obviously.
So just for clarification, a little bit of education for some of the newer members. Whenever there's an amendment to zoning regulations that could affect properties within 500 feet of the town border, and because this is going by business definition, it could affect hypothetically properties, they get referred to all the regional planning agencies that are associated with our town or the towns that abut us. So in this case, I think it went to 3. And the one that's responded, and they just respond for an advisory purpose, saying, does this conflict with the regional plan if it just looks like a really bad idea? And for something this minor, they've never seen them comment.
A similar process was followed with the Route 6 corridor study.
Right. So so we get back their comments. So that went on. We also have some staff comments, and police, fire, and the planning staff didn't find any conflict or safety issues. The town engineer who's here made a comment, and he can address that if he wishes to. But again, I think it's a minor change. I think it does not create any safety issues. It's for, you can have a residential setting where the residents' property get used to the use of their property, and it just allows more flexibility with the parking design. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have it.
Mr. Flanagan? Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to build your record, and then I wanted to give the city engineer a chance to respond if he'd like. On page 31 of your electronic packet is the referral of the proposed amendment. As Attorney Furey so correctly described, because this is his own text amendment to the regulations, it's referred to you, and Attorney Furey and I had a discussion, and we thought it would be prudent to also refer it to the surrounding towns and the regional planning agencies. As Attorney Furey said, we've only received a comment back so far from the Capital Region Council of Governments, and they had no comment. We did not include that in your packet, but we will make that part of the record of this meeting when we get back to the office. On page 32 is Attorney Furey's request and Mr. Talmadge's request to change the regulations. It's the cover letters on page 32. On page 33 is the text amendment that the assistant planner has up on the screen right now. And then on page 34 are the site plan review comments. We have gotten into the protocol, if you will. We're referring mostly all applications down to the Site Plan Committee. We think that they're a tremendous resource for us here in the city, and they see things sometimes that we might not see. So even though folks will just have no comment and they can respond pretty quickly, we want to just give them the opportunity to provide that comment. On page 34 of your electronic packet are the comments back. The city planner and assistant city planner and I had the comment that the land use division is generally supportive of the amendment that clarifies the existing parking setback regulations for various uses in different zones. I can tell you that probably within the last year and a half or so, Mr. Talmadge may have called me once or twice on this issue, and we generally talk on the phone quite a bit. But I remember at least 2 specific conversations he was asking me for kind of an over-the-phone interpretation. Well, how does this work, and does it really apply here? So when Attorney Furey and Mr. Talmadge brought the amendment forward, I thought it was a good common-sense way to kind of clean up the regulations, if you will. But I'm going to let, if the city engineer has any comments, he had a comment, and I'd like for him, if he wants to read that into the record, and maybe he wants to have a little interpretive dialogue with Attorney Furey.
Yeah. So if I may, Mr. Chairman, instead of just reading my comment, I guess I'd just like to, just for the commission's benefit, just give a little background. The purpose of the amendment, the purpose of the regulation as it pertains right now is really to prevent the queuing of traffic exiting a parking lot, blocking the ability from someone parking a vehicle within that 30-foot range from kind of being blocked in from the queue. So if you notice that in general there's a provision that parking has to be greater than 10 feet. So if you look like on the parking lot, even on the south side of City Hall, you notice that the space between the parking that runs parallel to the roadway and the roadway itself, the right-of-way, back and walk, is 10 feet. This provision typically is applicable when the parking configuration is really perpendicular to the roadway, where you have an access aisle entering a parking lot. The current provision is to require 30 feet. Once again, the purpose of that 30 feet has been so there can be a queuing of vehicles, stacking of vehicles, when they're exiting, that they're not blocking people trying to reverse, out or get out of a parking spot. Even just looking at some of the applications that become before the various land use applications, just thinking off, there's been a couple, even in the Federal Hill area, where people have tried to utilize lots in order to get more parking into the area, which I think in general is a good thing. They're talking very small residential lots, and when you superimpose this 30-foot requirement in, you lose at a minimum 2 spaces. Potentially, if you have parking on each side of the access aisle, you lose a 4 spots. Once again, on small residential applications, that's a lot of parking to lose. So in general, I do support the reduction from 30 to 10 feet. The proposed revision really ties it directly to the difference between residential use and a commercial use, the theory being that you have more concentrated peaks on commercial properties, in the sense that you'll have more queuing as opposed to residential, where you have a more even flow. And once again, I do believe that's generally true. I think that queuing does increase as you increase the number of parking, and even for a residential application, you still run the risk that that you in effect impede people from getting out of those spaces close to the access aisle, which is where I commented in that, in addition to just looking at it from a use, residential and commercial, should also some thought should be given to superimposing a criteria associated with the number of parking places associated with the parking field in general.
So in just in response, I understand the point, but in a residential setting, especially one as Ray described with 50 or more cars, it's basically what you have down the street in Ferraro's parking lot, well, that's only here because it's senior housing. You generally have assigned parking. You have people who are routinely using the site. And even at the 50 cars, you don't typically get, it's not the traffic generation you're thinking of. I've been going to my father-in-law's apartment 4 days a week for the past 4 years, right down the street, and I've never been behind another car in all those years. That's elderly housing, but I drive by Stafford Avenue all the time too, as maybe some of you do, and I'm not waiting for cars or pulling out of Delfino's parking lot. So I just, in the commercial settings, you have bigger vehicles, vehicles that are coming in and out at times, and you have people who are just parking randomly, coming in and out of the commercial industrial settings, which you don't have in the residential setting. So I don't think the concern, even if a car is temporarily blocked, they're going to wait till the queue changes and they're going to back up their car because they're going to be familiar with it, it's going to be assigned it. If it's an issue, the facility that's outside is going to assign it to someone who's working at the facility, just like we do with employee parking in various sites when we worked on the whole downtown with Carpenter to give him the ability to have a denser parking field to achieve what we wanted over there when we brought in Cigna. We brought in those kind of inventive measures, and we brought in a lot of tight parking, but we were able to assign parking in certain ways to make it work. And that's what this commission and the zoning commission recognize, is that when trying to achieve those goals, you look at the use of property, and the owner takes responsibility to get it to work. It is a general category property that's utilized differently, and we want to have the flexibility and not lose that space based on nature of parking. Police and fire did not see a problem with it. Yes, sir.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but do you think industrial use would be different? I thought about a minute ago you said you thought it would be different than residential. I'm wondering why this says business and industrial.
Well, I actually added industrial at the request of the town planner to my original filing. Just had business, and I added industrial to it to just distinguish between in industrial you typically have more controlled parking situations and less parking, but you do have some larger vehicles that come and go, and the town planner thought it was appropriate to distinguish between business industrial and residential, but I have no objection to taking out industrial. I just don't know if our town planner would be happy.
I just picture everybody hitting the time clock at 3 o'clock and they're in the parking lot and they're trying to get the hell out.
Right, but the industrial will have the business and industrial will have the 30-foot setback from the first space. It would remain for them.
I thought this said that would be changed also.
No, actually industrial was not referenced in the original. In the original thing, it was 10 feet for residential zones and 30 feet for business zones. And when we started looking at all these overlay situations, we realized, A, there is a distinction, so we changed residential uses, business uses, and when Bob reviewed my original draft, he said, we've never addressed industrial. We've never had a provision for it. So we added the word industrial to make it clear that a new industrial site plan, the first parking space should be queued at least 30 feet back. And I think there's other provisions that bring it there anyway.
And Commissioner Posey, that was just, I sit at my desk and I look at the zoning map all day long, and it was just a reflection of, calling out, we have business zones, industrial zones, and residential zones, and I just thought it was, if we're going to try to clean this up a little and Mr. Talmadge can call me anytime he wants, but just avoid some of the questions in the future, I just thought it cleaned it up a little better, and Attorney Furey was more than happy to add that, so I did collaborate a little on this.
If you don't feel there's a problem, I don't have a problem with it. And your staff doesn't have a problem, why would I have a problem?
And looking at, and I'll be living with that with some industrial applications someday, and I really haven't had one where we were in modern world where either all our non-conforming parking exists or we are developing a new site and no one's getting that close. And most industrial uses don't require that much parking, And when it's a problem, we can usually get waivers under the regulations to modify. We have built a lot of tools in for business, small car parking, things like that, which we applied in the pods situation a year ago. Happy to answer any questions. Bob told me to keep it short because you're so busy tonight, and tried.
I didn't say that, I really
Yeah.
Mr. Flanagan, if I ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
What zone, I don't know if it's a zone, churches are in residential zones, right?
Churches are an allowed use in a residential zone, yes, but there may be some churches that end up in industrial zones. I'm not thinking of any right off the top of my head. But a church is generally a residential type use.
Yeah, I'm going back and forth between these uses and zones. But one of the reasons I say that is in two other locations, not Bristol, that I know of. There's one that has a church, let's say here, and an entrance to the parking lot there, and an entrance to the parking lot there. Both of those are like aisles. They meet in the back. In the back, there is enough room to open the door, but the parking is perpendicular, as you say, to the building. Certain kinds of activity draw a lot of people, and if you're back there, you may be back there for a year. If you're over here or over there, there's a
quicker way out.
Kind of a quicker way out, but it still takes some skill. Then there's another church I saw in another town where every row in the parking lot, they had a parking lot across the street from the church, and every car was behind the car in front of it.
The church I grew up in did that.
One entrance is back here, and I always wondered what happens if you're an early leaver. I don't know what kind of parking you call it, but
Yeah. So, just to kind of try to answer the question, and Attorney Furey and I have had some discussions with respect to uses and zones. And I agree with Attorney Furey, and I want to characterize what he said, but I will. Residential uses tend to be uses that when people park on them, they go there all the time. If you live there, you become familiar with the site. If you go to church there every week, you become familiar with the site. Industrial and commercial uses, granted there are folks that use those sites all the time, but they're more business uses, and they're more accustomed to having strangers come and use those sites, and they need to be a little more planned out and a little more of a quiet area. But the church I grew up in, they just managed their parking that way. Everybody, just parked tandem because there weren't enough spaces for everybody. And it just kind of worked out. If you had to leave the service early, you were in traffic or in line, and you couldn't leave until the person in front of you left.
Now that parking is not permitted in Bristol.
Right, you're thinking of the funeral situation and those kind of things. And churches are special permit uses, subject to some constitutional requirements. And so there is a little different scrutiny when those are being reviewed and approved. And based on what we all know of the data, you're probably not going to be approving a lot new construction of churches, but the adaptive reuse of them in the future, which you in part started to do. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Commissioners, any other questions or comments? If none, a motion would be in order as a referral to the zoning commission, positive or negative. Motion would be in order.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, I move that a positive referral be sent to the Zoning Commission for application number 2271, proposed amendments to the zoning regulations, 1, to replace business zones with business and industrial zones, and 2, to replace the numerical 30 with the word 30 for layouts and dimensions of parking for subsection 8.b.6.a. Timothy Furey and Charles Talmadge, applicants. I feel that as an industrial zone and a business zone, we can get more parking in, which means more active participation with the city, taxes and so on and so forth, and businesses having to jump less hoops. The zoning text amendment application as presented is in compliance with the goals of the 2015 POCD for the following reason. A, Section 9.2 goals manage business development by B, encouraging appropriate building and site design.
Motion was made
Second.
and seconded. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next.
Next on the agenda is City Council and other referrals. There are none. Old business, there are none. New business, 3, election of officers.
Mr. Chairman, it is your yearly duty to elect a slate of officers or individual officers. I'm getting the sense the office wasn't contacted. There was no campaigning in this last month for any offices. We had discussed this the other day. You can do this individually, or you can just re-elect a slate. It's entirely up to you, whoever wants to make the motions and move this along, if you so desire.
I'm done campaigning.
Well, technically, we have we don't have a permanent secretary, but Mr. Howe has been doing a great job since Marie left. So, I think I would make a motion that Mr. Howe be elected as permanent secretary for the Planning Commission.
I second that.
Are there any other nominations?
I move the nomination for secretary.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are we using Robert Rules?
Are we?
Yes, of course.
Okay, I would suggest Mr. Chairman cannot make a motion for the chair.
You're right. You're exactly right.
I move that I nominate Mr. Andrew Howe be the permanent secretary of the Planning Commission.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Next on the agenda is the appointment of a
You need to do the whole slate.
Oh, that's right.
I'd like to nominate Bill Veets for chair and John Soares as vice chair.
Second.
Motion was made and seconded. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Congratulations.
All right, yeah, that's right.
All right, now we can move on to appointment of a representative to the Naugatuck Valley Regional Planning Commission.
Mr. Flanagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have been without the city has been without a representative on the Regional Planning Commission since Commissioner Chassie left in the mid part of the summer. Commissioner White had approached the chair in our office and said that he would be interested in serving on the Regional Planning Commission. I just had the assistant planner hand out the coming agenda for for Tuesday, February 6th of the Regional Planning Commission. The Regional Planning Commission has a few different roles. They review land use referrals similar to the Route 6 study and the text amendments, among various other things that they do. Also, the Regional Plan of Conservation and Development will be up for a new renewal this year. It's an interesting time to be involved with the Regional Planning Commission. The Council of Governments in Waterbury was reconstituted a few years ago, and Bristol, as we've talked about before, Bristol and Plymouth joined with several of the other lower Naugatuck Valley towns to make it a 19-town region now. So it is a very good time to be involved. It's kind of a ground floor opportunity, and Commissioner White has expressed interest in serving. So this is a mayoral appointment. But there has to be a recommendation from the Planning Commission to the Mayor's office to appoint, if you so desire, to appoint Commissioner White. And again, the assistant planner put the current agenda in front of you. Because Commissioner White has expressed an interest over the last month, as I've received material in our office, I've been forwarding it to him via email. That's pretty much all I have. If you do appoint Commissioner White, and you've already talked a little about, we're going to get together and chat a little in the office next week about some of his duties, and then we'll send him down to Waterbury and represent the city.
Is this like a monthly meeting or quarterly meeting?
It's every other month.
Oh, every other month.
Yep. And I will say, just anecdotally, I know when the region expanded, there were all new appointments made, and there has been some of the towns haven't necessarily sent someone on a regular basis. So I think Commissioner White's participation is going to be very well valued by the Council of Governments in Waterbury, and the fact that we're the second largest population in the council, I think will be represented well by him, and it's good that we're at those meetings and we have a seat at the table.
Good. Thank you. Well, the motion would be in order then.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend to Mayor Sasso that Planning Commissioner David White be appointed to the City of Bristol's representative to the Naugatuck Valley Regional Planning Commission effective February 1st, 2018.
Second. Motion was made and second. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Okay, we can move on to staff reports. We have the monthly subdivision status report.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer to the city engineer if he has anything. I don't believe there are any updates. Mr. Rogozinski, did you have anything you wanted to add to the commission? Through the chair, of course.
No, nothing, to report. I would say that there was a question on the Cold Springs, Farms, subdivision with respect to, the bond, expiring. And I would say that a lot of times the bonds have a rolling renewal, and it's possible that we just haven't received the paperwork. I would also say that the bond is required for the applicant developer in order to pull building lots, and that's not the case on Cold Springs Road, or at least that section.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. Okay, next.
On to communications. We have none. On to the audience of citizens. I'm going to read the following guidelines for the audience of citizens. They shall apply until further notice. 1. The Bristol Planning Commission encourages citizens to express their views and concerns on agenda items during the audience of citizens. Because the Planning Commission's time is limited and its agenda can sometimes be extensive, the chairperson shall encourage brevity and in citizens' statements in order to allow other citizens to participate. The audience of citizens shall be limited to each regular meeting of the Planning Commission to 15 minutes. Each citizen shall be given 3 minutes, and the chairperson shall monitor the time used by each citizen. Comments will be limited to agenda items other than developmental applications. 3, for those who are not able to offer comment during the audience of citizens, they are encouraged to submit comments in writing to the Planning Commission through the Land Use Office. 4, the Planning Commission are discouraged from using the audience of citizens to raise their own concerns during this portion of the agenda. 5, Planning Commissioners should not offer comment on past, pending, or future development applications during the audience of citizens.
Is there anyone here that wishes to speak about any of the agenda items tonight? No? Okay. I see we have 2 people, 4 people here, well, 5. Did you have any questions or anything, or no? How about you? No? What was that? Okay, good. Well, I hope you enjoyed yourself. Okay. Okay, next item on the agenda.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Yeah, I know.
Beat the curfew.
Good luck at regional planning.
Beat the curfew.
Yeah, no, it's